much for being here, all of you, and thank you, Anna Teos. It's a real honor to have you here, and it's a real honor to have you here as well, Fabrice Samyn. So I'll introduce myself very briefly. My name is Joana Pierre Neves, or Joana Pierre Neves, more specifically. I'm a Portuguese curator, independent curator and writer. I'm artistic director of Drawing Now Art Fair. And I have a podcast as well. I'm also a podcaster called Exhibitionistas, so go ahead after this. You will immediately listen to it. And I have the honor of being here to stimulate a conversation. I mean, let's face it, we are going to talk about birds. That's really what kind of brought us here together. So as I was thinking about this conversation, I was looking out the window and I was looking at my neighbor's cat, who thought he was chasing a magpie, uma pega, but actually the magpie was taunting him. He thought he was the master of the situation, but the magpie was really making fun of him. You know, I think I could almost see her laugh. She was almost laughing. And then meanwhile, my two cats were looking at the tree. We have a bay leaf tree. And they were completely mesmerized by the two newcomers who had just arrived, these two beautiful pigeons. These grey, beige, white pigeons who were making their nests, almost as big as the smaller cat. He was kind of recoiling and looking at them. And birds are powerful. They really are. They're intelligent. They're incredible creatures. And thank you, Fabrice, for making me read a book by Vinciane Desprez, where she explained that birds are not territorial like we think. They choose the best place, up a tree or somewhere else, from whence the sound can be the most beautiful sound and project the better. So birds kind of brought us together here. But most of all, first of all, the person who really congregated all this this kind of mismatched and beautiful audience that you are here is Fabrice, and we're surrounded by your paintings. This is a beautiful kind of conceptual installation, but actually really sensible and really sensitive and really powerful, almost performative and very mindful. So can you tell us the story behind these paintings?
Yeah. So first, it's happening at the blue hour, so at this time where the visible and the invisible become indivisible. All my work is about connecting the visible and the invisible. It's about going beyond duality. And here, when the leaves, in the winter time, when the leaves become invisible, something else becomes visible. So I'm obsessed with that, as I'm now working now on a new mortuary place, a place where we can gather and also host our grief when we lose someone in beauty. So I'm obsessed, and it also will be a place for weddings. So now, all my work is about going beyond this duality. So here is the blue hour, when the branch become almost like, just they become lines, and so they become something else. The relief reveal their shape, because they're very much outlined into the blue color. So when the leaves are gone, you can see the nest, and when the light fades away, you can see the silhouette much better, because the relief kind of goes in the background and the silhouette goes on the foreground. So I was very moved to think that when things become invisible, others become very visible. So I wanted to really give time and space to that. And so I prepared all these gradient colors, from this moment where the sun fades to almost night. And I went into the woods next to my studio, and I just walked around, and I looked at the nests, and every time I would see a nest, I would sit and really take a moment, like 15 to 20 minutes, to really remember the nest. And then I would go back in the studio, walk back in the studio, and have 3 paintbrushes on my belt, with a bucket of black oil paint, and with my breath, I would draw the branch of the tree. So, inhaling, going in the color with the paintbrush, exhaling, going and shaping the branch. And when the exhale is over, the branch is done. So it was kind of the protocol I gave myself. because I really tried to go in this this idea of the reciprocity, you know, visible, invisible, inhaling, exhaling. Also, is very much part of their work. So.
And why did you fixate on the nest? So each painting has a nest. Why was it brought to your attention, this architecture?
Because it was moving that you see the home, it's also symbolic, you know, because all my work is trying to bring kind of spiritual questions into nature, because one of the main challenge of, you know, the book religion, the religions of the book, one of the main challenge was our relationship to nature and the way we invented nature, because we're all nature, there's only one living. And so I was moved by the fact that we see a place of a home, that when everything is vulnerable during winter, you can see a home. So it was also a metaphor that you can only see best in winter the nest. So when you're vulnerable, when it's cold, when you're being challenged, you can see what is home, who is even more so, who is home. And so that was the idea. It's also symbolic.
Yeah. And so you kind of devised a title that is poetic. It sounds like a verse of a forgotten poem. You see best in winter the nest. And so the title is kind of singing in some ways. So I turn to you, Anna, because of course Sonia, when she was thinking of what to do today, what made sense, she sent me I think a sonata by Messiaen. And she said, oh my gosh, birds, birds and music. Tell us a little bit about that and about your personal relationship with bird singing and the way you go into music and playing music, interpreting.
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Sonia, for inviting, and you both. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Birds intertwine with my own personal history, and thankfully you talked about Messiaen, because that's kind of my starting point, as weird as that might seem. When you said at the beginning that we are gathering here because of birds, I would dare say we're gathering here because birds take us somewhere else. Birds take us to some natural spaces that we have a difficult time finding in a city like Lisbon today, with all these traffic jams and rushes and all of that. So I think Fabrice is passionate about going those places, and I am too. So when I was very young, I was 12, I started going with a bird watching group. I was bird watching, and I would do that in a very regular manner. So we would go, at first we were going once every 3 months, and then at the end, when I was about 22, we were going at least once a month to different places, and work like as close as possible to the way an ornithologist would work. And so when I was in my last year in high school, I had a very hard time. My parents are here, they can testify to that, because for the whole year I was just like, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to follow a career in biology?
Ornithology.
Ornithology, clearly. Or am I going to become a pianist? And I just couldn't make up my mind. And I'm a very organized person, so I was, reflecting what is the advantages of this and the disadvantages and all of that. And my head could not bring me to any conclusion. And so one day I was in a very beautiful building with a view, a beautiful summer view. I could see the castle here in Lisbon, and it was so peaceful, and the sky was blue, and I closed my eyes and I thought, okay, I've done my homework. I've thought about this for a whole year, so I'm just going to trust my intuition. So I'm going to close my eyes, and whatever comes up, that's what I'm going to do. And piano came up, so that's what I chose. But
I'm so glad.
Well, let's talk about that after let's talk about that after I play. So anyway, but birds stayed with me, and this need, it's more than it's like an urge to be into nature, to be within nature. It stayed with me. So very soon I started thinking, how can I merge those two things? I just could not leave birds behind. And as I was studying here right in front of us at the Lisbon Conservatory. The higher school, as we call it, was in the 3rd floor, so I was there. And someone told me, you should go there, go to the library and search for some Olivier Messiaen composer. You should look into his works because you like birds, and he wrote a lot about birds. And I was totally unconscious, so I just went there and I was like, oh my God. And there were I found Catalogue d'Oiseaux. There were 13 pieces organized in 7 books. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this has been written for me. And so, which piece will I play first? And I thought, well, okay, I'll play my favorite bird. It happens to be one of the most difficult pieces, but who cares? So I just took the book and I started there. And then from then on, we're talking 1991. From then on, I just started digging and digging and digging on bird music or music inspired by birds, because there are many different tendencies, as I'll explain along. But so I've been doing it. I've worked with ornithologists, doing different types of projects together, and it has been a real pleasure. So that's my way of making my 2 sides come together.
Wow, what an incredible story.
Yeah, it's
Little
fun.
did I know that it was going to be so spot on.
Yeah, it is.
Speaking about birds.
It is.
That's absolutely incredible. So, when you chose your favorite bird, I'm sure that everyone here is asking themselves which bird
Which bird is that?
Yeah.
Well, that's a bird which
In French.
In French. Ça s'appelle le courlis cendré. Latin name Numenius arquata, Portuguese name Maçarico real, and English name curlew.
Oh,
Okay. So, it's a very, very beautiful bird, like a big bird with a huge beak like this. And I used to go very often to Estuário do Tejo, so to this marshland. And this bird has such a beautiful song, and it would sing all by itself at like 4 a.m. in the morning. And I remember me and 2 other colleagues, we would wake up at 3 to go to a certain place to hear that enchantatory sound. It was so special. And Messiaen had captured it in such a powerful way, because in this one musical work, the curlew had big solos to start with, and then you could sense everything that was going around, some other birds, but also the tide coming down, and the water tide and the night, just
it
like
by the sea. It lives by the sea. Okay.
Yes, and just the way you capture the different phases of light at that period of day. Messiaen, with his piece, he's always also portraying different times of day.
Okay.
And this is not the piece I'm going to play today, but that's the first piece of him, by him, that I played. Yeah.
So Fabrice, exhibitions, or at least this one, are silent, right? Because you are evoking the birds, the nests. You're evoking the breath, the way you painted, the way you also were so mindful in keeping that image, and then coming back home and trying to replicate that experience of looking at the trees in the twilight. And there's a piece downstairs that has a bird feather. So tell us a little bit about that feather, but also about the state that you were thinking of for us, actually, all of us, to go downstairs and maybe be part of that piece in silence. Or maybe not.
No, I mean, it's an invitation. Everyone is free. So the carpet the piece is called "To Sit and See Light as a Feather," because in English, light has a double acceptation. It's not heavy, and also the light as we know it. And so I wanted to create a space a meditative space where you could actually sit on the blue hour, sit on this verge of being reminded everything that makes us appear is also slowly making us disappear. The force of life that makes us appear is the same force of life that will make us disappear, and it's dear to my heart to be always reminded of that. So that blue color is all about that. So when I sit on it, it's this invitation, and the stool is made out of apple tree that is part of a big sculpture that I did called the Fallen Tree of Knowledge. So it's an apple tree completely eaten by worms that I gilded with recycled gold from computers. and I called it the fallen tree of knowledge. And from that, I created different furniture, and this furniture is a assembled little stool in which you sit, and you're reminded that you're made of dust, and to dust you will return. And I like to say, to dusk you will return, because you return to dusk, but it means that it's all about the cycle. But also to light, you will return. This is why I like to...
The worm went back to the bird, because probably the bird ate the worm.
Yeah.
So there's also the cycle of life.
It's true. You know that? It's a really good question. I never actually I should have made a really more like precise connection. Thank you for pointing that out. About which bird is eating the insect that I'm concerned. So the bird downstairs is a parrot from Amazonia that is actually threatened, as we know, as I'm starting a research there on the problematic of gold digging in Amazonia and all the mercury poisonous that's going on there for everything, all the ecosystem. And so it's set on the bone of an arm, human bone of an arm. So reminding us that we made of the gravity, but also of something that can, tame spaciousness, and maybe that's more of my spiritual, acquaintance. But everyone can connect it the way they feel. It's right.
There's so many animals in the exhibition. It's really useful to see, and also you kind of start thinking like what connects us and what differentiates us from them. And we were talking about the breath, and I was wondering, the breath in animals, in birds particularly, is it something that is included in a piece that is inspired by birds? And also I was wondering, when you play the piano, what does that do to your breathing? Is it akin to what happened here? And maybe I think I'm more interested in the second question first.
It's interesting.
Okay, let's start with the second question. I usually tell my students that even though we pianists are not wind instrumentalists, so we don't actually need our breath to produce sound, we do need it.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest mistakes we can make as a pianist, and I have here someone who can confirm that too, is not to breathe. If you hold your breath, you cannot express yourself. And then as a pianist, you need to find how to translate the natural movements of your breath and how your breath shapes the music, because it does.
Wow.
One thing is when you play something just like mechanically from beginning to end, everything perfect. The other thing is when you breathe with the music the way you would just breathe to survive, to be yourself. So then our job is not only to breathe, but also to breathe mentally when we read the score, when we interpret the score, but also to breathe with our hands. So I usually say to my students that you need to learn how to breathe with your wrists. So sometimes you exhale, sometimes you inhale, and that's how you actually make the music sound, in my humble perspective.
So the gravity, so you feel that the gravity of inhaling and exhaling
Absolutely, yeah.
Interesting.
And what about, so the birds have a different anatomy to us?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Most of the music I'm going to play is like most Western music dedicated to birds. It's more an evocation of the poetry that birds convoke in us. But some specific works, like Messiaen's, for example, they tend to be literal. They try to be literal. So what would Messiaen do? He would go out in the fields. That he had a very elaborate process. And I'm talking about this because I'm going to get to your question, to the anatomy of the bird. So he would go out in the fields with his wife, with whom I had the enormous privilege of working, and he would go out with her for the sessions where they would just watch the birds, hear the birds, and he would take some music paper and write down what he was hearing, which is totally impressive for whomever knows solfège. It's such an exercise. It's almost incomprehensible how someone could do that. But he was not happy with that, so she would record with a tape recorder the same bird song. And when they would go home, he would transcribe this bird song from the recording. And then he would work both together and come to a synthesis or something that he actually could use in his music. Now, where do I come to your question? He was well aware that birds are much smaller than we are. They have totally different anatomical characteristics. So when we hear their voice, they're very often in pitches that are very high for our frequencies, for our normal frequencies. So he would do this kind of translation. He would bring these frequencies to normal human Occidental instruments, Western instruments range, but he would correct the speed, because the speed, of course, when you're much higher, it's much higher. So he would...
No, I missed it. So when the speed is much higher?
Let's say the bird chatters like... It's very high in the register, and it's also very fast. Yeah. So when he translates that to the modern piano or to any other instrument, he would do it a little slower and in a lower register to make it proportional.
Okay.
You know?
So the speed and the highness was brought together.
Yes,
okay,
yes. And then he actually used this procedure to, in a sense, he renovated musical language and style in the middle of the 20th century. And many of his students became extremely prominent, like Pierre Boulez, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. We have here someone who knows much more about that than I do, because he studied with Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. And they were getting really prominent in the 50s, and their post-serial way was the way to go. And Messiaen somehow had taught those people, but he needed to find his own language. And I find that bird song helped him a lot doing that. Yeah. Because, for example, when you'll hear what I'll do in the piano, how the way the two hands conjugate, the way harmonies are put together, they're absolutely not put together according to any previously known system. He's just trying to, through harmony, trying to evoke the timbre of the birds and to modulate this timbre, which is an incredible process. I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but I think with the piece I'm going to play, you might understand that.
But I have a question. So do you feel that the translation was not
faithful?
No, it was not like more like a mental protocol or a thoughtful protocol than it was a sensing protocol, or do you feel like when you're hearing a bird and then when you're hearing the composition, you feel that there's something there that he managed to translate, or you think it became something else? It was just a strategy.
No, it is a translation to a certain extent. Now, there's one thing that's really important to say, that when he translated, he wrote a lot for the piano because his wife was a pianist, and she was a very big influence and someone who really devoted all her life to his music. And in fact, the piano has keys, as you know, and the distance...
They were collaborators.
Yeah, well, whatever. So the sound distance between these keys is standard, which is not the case with the violin, for example. The violin can make no matter what space between two notes. We cannot do that at the piano. We have a standard set of notes which are distant apart from a certain length. And he needed to do that translation to be able to use the piano. So that's the question.
Also for the body of the interpreter.
Exactly. So what happens, for example, when I played this first piece that I told you about, Le Cours d'Isandré, I made an experience. I played it in public, and I had lots of my friends from the bird watching group. And I said, okay, so I'm not going to tell you anything. Oh. I'm going to tell you only this. This piece is about one bird. But besides that one species, there are other 17 species of birds represented. So please, mind what you'll hear and tell me after, what did you identify? And of course, the bird, they identified it all of a sudden. I mean, there was no question about it, immediately, yeah. And then from the 17 species, they could go like 10. They could identify 10.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And in this one I'm going to play, I think it's quite understandable too.
I'm really interested in the notion of interpreting, because we were talking about Messiaen and his wife, and how she in some ways also supported this project of his that was quite crazy. If you think about it, it's such a crazy project, and how they kind of worked together, but in some ways being a pianist, you are an interpreter.
Of course.
But at the moment in contemporary art, we're kind of redefining the role of the artist as well. Do you consider that you also kind of in some ways when you did these paintings in particular, did you think of your role in all of this? As an interpreter or as a translator, as someone who was kind of trying to get closer and stepping out of your humanity and maybe going into another state? How do you see yourself?
It's a very challenging question. Thank you for asking me. I think it's a key question to what's happening now. Maybe it's a way to make a difference. To answer that question, I have to make a difference between design and art.
Okay.
Because when animals produce forms, it always comes with a function, and even in seduction strategies, and I think there's this. For a long time, that's a personal way to see it, but for a long time, design was concerned, when it's an ethic design, it's concerned about form design, how does the form and the function meet together, and then process design. If you're responsible, you say, okay, am I going to bring this wood from Poland, this rubber from Congo, how many times the boat has to turn around the planets to bring that object together, how can I make it the most conscious, sustainable. And third is the system design. For instance, you build a building, is it going to host, is it going to be hospitable for birds? Is it going to be, what product you will need to clean it? Is it going to be dangerous for your health? That's system design. How does that collaborate with other living beings and until it's recycling? And process, how is it made and how do you design the way it's made, from transport to crating and form design is just how the form. Art hasn't been about that at all. It has, until now, I think. It has always been about consensus. What is beauty? What is God? What is sexuality? What is gender? What is identity? And challenging consensus. And so, what is money? Reminding us that money is a consensus. And working at the base of certain things. And I think it has been sometimes quite efficient at that. But now we're realizing it's because of the huge problematic we're facing that. Nothing comes out of nowhere, when you ask me this question, is how would this painting go back to where it comes from? So would bird interact with that, or how, would it be, on the way it will be aging, or the way it will smell? Because I use a certain product, so I will humbly say that for now I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. I'm really working on it.
This is oil paint.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
It's not acrylic.
No, it's oil paint. And so I'm working on works that actually will also close the cycle, work from where it comes from, and then goes back to where it comes from, and keep on the interaction. Right. And it might be closer to design.
Right. Oh, it's really interesting. Because we have this idea of the hierarchies, right? You have the genius, and then the person who comes and does the technical bit and solves the problem, and then someone like you interprets. But things are so different because memory, as scientists are kind of discovering now, is not an archive in our minds. Memory is actually recreating something that you've experienced before, neurologically. So interpreting becomes something else.
Of course, and also this idea of the genius is an idea which is very much connotated with romanticism. So we're not quite there yet. We're not quite there for now. Anymore, yeah. So what I feel is, as an interpreter, I have the chance. Well, I work a lot with contemporary music and also with non-contemporary music. But with non-contemporary music, I receive a score. And for a long time, I have been taught that this is the work, this is the musical work. But it's not. A score is a piece of paper with some markings on it. This becomes a work of art when I put my sensitivity to learn that music, to try to figure out how does the sensitivity of the composer connect with mine. I'm not saying that I can read the composer's thoughts, I cannot, but I can connect with him through what I feel, through what I read in that piece of paper.
Well, you put some of yourself on it as well.
Of course, each time I play, I put myself on it. That's evident, and especially when you play with, when you work with contemporary composers, these barriers between the creator and the interpreter are blurring more and more, because we're actually co-creating together. We're experimenting. We're trying to find solutions.
And beyond Messiaen.
Beyond? What do you mean?
I just have one more question for Messiaen.
Okay, so let's stay with Messiaen for now.
No. So how did you have strategy? Because Messiaen is not always easy as it reinvented. Did you have strategy, talking about team spirit with the composer and then the interpreter? Did you have strategy to help the audience to really go on a blank page in their mind, to really be hospitable to what they're hearing and let go of expectation of harmony? And did you have strategies on that?
Yes, I'll try one later on today.
Okay.
I'll try one. It's a total try. It's an experiment. But when I first started, I remember clearly one of the first times, if not the first one, I played Le Cours Lissandre in public. I was in a very informal space and there were lots of people and I was totally ready to play. I sat down, I was focused, I was concentrated, I was hearing the music in my head. And all of a sudden I thought, I'm so stupid. There's a whole film going on in my head because I know the story of this piece, but they know nothing about it. How can I even imagine that I'm going to deliver this music without giving some cues so that people can, be with me, stay with me? Mm-hmm. And I was a little scared because I was also told in my traditional education that you should not speak before you play because then you're not focused on your music.
You're out of it.
Yes. And I thought, I don't care about that. So let's try. So I was totally focused. I stood up and I started talking to people. And I just, as I was doing that, I remarked this gentleman here, or my colleague with the green shirt there, or Beatrice with the white shirt there. And all of a sudden, the public, that scary entity, became a group of friendly people who were there to listen to me.
Now I see you all differently, by the way.
So from that moment on, I thought I should never again do this, because the recital setting is really a 19th century kind of setting. So you go to your place, you do what you have to do, and they're there. I did not want that to happen anymore. So there's not me and they. It's like we're here there's a connection. We're here, we're gathering around something. So I'll try to do that.
Okay, I don't want us to take too much, just one last question, because we need to listen to you. But beyond Messiaen, not beyond as in we surpass him, but in other areas of music, do birds come in? Did that very special relation you have with birds also initiated other relations with other composers?
Oh, that's for sure. I go back to my dear friend there. Jaime Reis, he's a composer. I've worked a lot with him. I've worked a lot with lots of Portuguese composers from our time. That's a great privilege. Not only Portuguese, but especially. And with Jaime, for example, we have explored a little bit music based on biological models, so beyond birds. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So one great work of art that I love by Jaime Reis is called Lysozyme synthesis. So lysozyme synthesis. So it's about the synthesis of a protein. Yeah. And so it's based on a biological model. And of course, then I got a big interest in insects and music, or forests and music, and so many different avenues to explore.
So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, to honor us.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Donna.
And thank everyone who's here. Yes. Now, should we just
say how things will?
Will you do that, or should I do it? Okay, yes. So now for the recital, I'm going to be playing downstairs. And for those of you who have a very perfected musical and acoustical ear, please don't be surprised. Of course, there's lots of echo here. I think we can still hear what I'm playing, but the place is so special, and the fact that we're surrounded by Fabrice's work is so special that honestly, I'm not going to worry too much about that. So for those of you who are musicians, that might seem a little bit strange, but just bear with it, please.
Thank you very much.
So now I'm going to drive you through, I don't know, 3 centuries, 3 centuries of piano music focusing on birds. But first I would like to say, I won't talk a lot about Middle Ages because our biggest Portuguese specialist in the field is right here, so I'm getting really, really nervous. But I would like to say that bird song in music goes back not only to a lot of time in our own civilization, but it appears also in civilizations from Africa, from Asia, and from other parts of the world. In our case, ever since the Middle Ages, we have been concerned with representing, portraying birds in music. If I think of some troubadours, for example, I may say that the lark, generic lark, because of course there are many different species of larks, the lark and the nightingale have been portrayed since the Middle Ages. And in this troubadour song, in their text, in their poetry, those were evoked in a very human-like manner. They were used to evoke, how do you say, springtime, and therefore love. And it's funny that we're going to bring some springtime to this exhibition where Fabrice focused on winter. So when we get to the Baroque, and the first piece I'll play for you dates back to 1724. It was published in France. It's part of a larger group of compositions by Jean-Philippe Rameau, which is called Pièces de clavecin. We will find, I think you will understand how he portrays birds. There's a certain virtuoso quality to it. There are certain intervals that come again and again. There are lots of little trills, little ornaments that evoke chattering, bird chattering, but it's evocative. It doesn't try to be a real portrait, as Messiaen will try to do much later. On the other side, even also from the Middle Ages, there was another tendency of portraying bird song, namely the cuckoo, because the cuckoo has a very single song, a very simple song, as you know, ta 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 ta, that was used by many composers and artists as a very simple reproduction to make. So when we wanted to be evocative, we would go to the larks and to the nightingales. When we would like to be a little more accurate, we would use cuckoos. But Rameau will simply call his piece Le Rappel des Oiseaux. So birds gathering. We're inviting spring into this exhibition. I hope you like it. Desculpem, tenho aqui uma nota a aprender. E esta parte julgo que a culpa não é minha. Bom, começámos então ainda antes de meados do século XVIII e agora damos um salto. Damos um salto e vamos até ao século XIX, 1849. Esta peça tem um título enigmático, A Ave Profeta, L'Oiseau Prophète. Faz parte de um conjunto de cenas da floresta de Robert Schumann. E eu, para enquadrar, queria apenas dizer que estamos numa época em que a natureza já não é domesticada como foi, por exemplo, nos jardins à francesa do século precedente. A natureza é imolada no seu estado mais selvagem, mais indomado, digamos assim. E, no fundo, a natureza convoca para o ser humano em profunda reflexão sobre o modo como se situa no mundo, convoca toda uma dimensão espiritual que vai ser aqui muito presente nesta peça. Por isso é que ela se chama L'Oiseau Prophète. Eu penso que a própria peça é tão enigmática como o título que tem, por isso espero que gostem. Continuamos, saltamos poucos anos, 1862, 1863, continuamos numa veia muito espiritual. Estamos a falar agora de Ferenc Liszt e estamos a falar de uma obra que se chama São Francisco pregando às aves. Liszt estava na altura, desde 1861, a viver em Roma. Como muitos de vós saberão, tinha sido um extraordinário virtuoso do piano, tinha feito concertos por toda a Europa com o maior sucesso, um estrondoso sucesso, tinha desenvolvido o próprio piano a um nível nunca antes pensado e no final da vida começa a refletir sobre essa vida, sobre a vida, sobre a sua ligação com o mundo, com a espiritualidade e começa a fechar-se mais sobre aquilo que é o seu universo interior, recolhendo-se um pouco da vida mundana que tinha tido até lá. Desculpem, esqueci-me que era para continuar em inglês. I'm so sorry, I forgot I should go on in English. So, here we go. So I'm sorry for the problem with the piano. There's really nothing I can do about it, so I'll just assume it and try to not get too distracted about it and just keep going. So as I was saying, we are going now from Robert Schumann to Ferenc Liszt, and we're going to visit a work he wrote in 1862-63, a work called The Predication of St. Francis to the Birds. As I was saying, Liszt had been living in Rome since 1861, and he had been one of the biggest virtuosos in history, someone that brought the piano to another level that had never previously been dreamt of, and someone who had been in all the stages around Europe, who had had enormous and consistent success all over the Western world at the time. Now, at the end of his life, he focused much more on his own persona and with his relationship with transcendence than in the first part of his life. He had had a really accidented sentimental life and all of that, and those years seemed to be behind him as he was reflecting in a more mystical and religious way. He even got minor orders in Rome. So where he was living since 1861 in Rome, he had a marvelous view over the countryside. And he was very much inspired by this nature that surrounded him, but at the same time by his own mystical reflection. He was inspired also by a magnificent painting by Giotto in Assisi, which represents this predication of St. Francis to the birds. And Liszt took this subject and treated it in a very delicate way, I would say. As you will hear in this piece, you'll have, you're welcome to sit on the floor, lie down, whatever. He really treats the piano here in a very, very delicate sense. And just to guide a little bit your hearing, there's going to be a first part in which birds are portrayed in the high register of the piano, and I think that will be very evident to you. At a certain point in the piece, you will hear a voice, and Liszt does this very often in his works, a voice that sings, almost as a recitativo, a voice that sings, speaks at the same time. And this voice is supposed to be the saint, St. Francis himself. Of course, he's accompanied by a little bit of chattering by the birds, but of course birds are more silent because he's speaking. Then his voice evolves into a kind of religious chorale, so several voices, but you can imagine that you're in a church at that moment. And at the end, we will have again the birds coming back over the voice of the saint. So this is a magnificent piece, and I hope I can go through it with this mais um salto adiante. Okay, again, I started Portuguese. So another leap ahead, and we find ourselves in 1905. So as you well know, during the 19th century, we woke up for the Industrial Revolution, and we got more and more concentrated in cities with a view of factories, with a view of towers, with a view of expanding cities, and with less view of natural spaces. Those natural spaces started being idealized. Just think about what Monet did in France with the parks, how he portrayed those parks, those sanctuaries of nature within spaces so much more urbanized than before, how he did that in his paintings. Well, Maurice Ravel wrote a cycle called Miroirs, and he used to say that this piece, this particular piece, Oiseaux, tristes, which comes from that cycle, is probably the one that was most spontaneous for him. And this piece actually portrays birds in a very dark forest in the heat of the summer. So they're kind of dormant because of this heat that surrounds us, and I come from Alentejo, so I can totally relate to that feeling, but we don't have those dark forests as you can find in Fontainebleau, for example. So, Oiseaux tristes. Bom, agora chegou a vez de todos vocês trabalharem um bocadinho comigo. In English. Now it's the time for you to work with me, if I may ask your cooperation. So I would like to do a little exercise. We've talked a lot about Messiaen so far. I'll ask Carolina to help me a little bit with our technological business. And then I'll tell you what I would like you to do. Carolina, let me check if we're all right. Okay. Just one more little detail. Okay. Okay. So I've told you a lot about Olivier Messiaen. If you want to, well, let me proceed. Olivier Messiaen is seen there in the photo with his wife recording birdsong in France. So I've talked a lot about Catalogue d'Oiseaux while we were talking with Fabrice. This is a magnificent work for piano composed of 13 pieces which are organized in 7 books. He was crazy about prime numbers. So in these 7 books, these 13 pieces in 7 books, they are the result of a big campaign of collecting birdsong all over France that he did with his wife between the years of 1956 and 1958. So he transcribed, he recorded, and he devoted one piece to a different bird, each one of them. Now, the piece I'm going to play has as a principal actor the bird, the skylark. So the skylark is going to be in a dialogue, but let's talk about this in a moment. Skylark, where are you? Oh, first, before we talk about the skylark, let me tell you a funny story about this piece. When he was traveling with Yvonne Loriot, they got married only in 1962 because he had been previously married to a violinist, Claire Delbos, and she was not dead when she had to be interned in a medical facility because she had some health problems. And she was there for a very long time. And of course, Messiaen, who was a very Catholic person, he could not even conceive of the idea of a divorce, especially because his wife was ill. So he just he kept faithful to her, even though they were not living together for many years. And in the meanwhile, Yvonne Loriot, who was to become his second wife, was his student at the Paris Conservatoire. And so when they did this research work in the fields, they were not yet married. Yvonne Loriot recalls, this is something she told me in one of my classes with her, that they were, at some point, they were in a place in France that's called the region of Forez. And they had rented 2 rooms in a small place. And one evening, she was very surprised to see that Messiaen, her professor, was missing. She went down the hallway, and down the hallway there was a toilet. And he was there. He was in the toilet. And he would not come out. So she was a bit worried, a bit scared. Of course, he was her professor, so she didn't dare knock and say, "Hey, is everything okay?" So she just, tried to go to bed and get some sleep. And in the early morning, he came out. And what she said was that he had been noting birdsong for the whole night. Now, who were the people, the birds he was listening to? Well, the 2 birds we're going to listen right now. The woodlark, the woodlark and the nightingale. They're going to be in a dialogue. So, as in all of the pieces of Messiaen in the Catalogue d'Oiseaux, he writes a scenario, as you have there. So he's basically describing, you're in a forest. Actually, there's this lane of like a prairie, and then you have trees on one side, and then you have the mountain on the other side. And that's the place where he finds the trees, where he will listen to these 2 birds singing. He always does this for his pieces. His pieces in Catalogue d'Oiseaux are more like, how should I say, like theater pieces, put in a natural setting, and then the piece has a narrative. Now, our characters. So this is the place, by the way. So you can see there a little bit. I found this picture where you can see more or less the prairie, the mountain, and the trees aligned. And now, our first character, the woodlark. Now you know her. Nice to meet you. And her counterpart, the nightingale. So just put these two heads in your minds for the moment, okay? So these are both of them together. Now, the woodlark, normally her song comes when she's in flight, in a very high flight. And she also stops on top of trees to deliver her song. And what happens in this song? Now, please pay very close attention to what I'm going to say. You have a high note, and from that high note she does taro, 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 or she stays in that high note. So everything starts from the high note, okay? What do you think? Is there a connection, or I'm just totally inventing things, making things up? Can you hear the similarities? Yeah. Really? Okay. So now our other bird, oh, no. Let me tell you something really, really important about the woodlark. So the woodlark, her song comes from a very high note. She sings in a very high flight or where she's perched in a very high tree. So for Messiaen, this is the voice of heaven, okay? And he was very religious, as I already said. So the voice of heaven is like an angel, and an angel connects you to the transcendental element. So this is what birds do to him. And the woodlark has a very special role to play in that mythology, let's say it like that, okay? So the woodlark, the voice from heaven, okay? You've got it, yeah? Everybody has got it, okay. So now, this little bird here, the nightingale, let me show you. Okay, so now this little fellow is much different, isn't it? Yeah, so a lot of different timbres. It's like the texture of the different cells of his song is really contrasting, right? Well, normally he's singing, probably all of you know nightingales, and you know that they're not easy to see. You probably have heard them, but not seen them. Why? Because they are normally hidden in bushes. So this is what Messiaen heard that night. The woodlark was on top of a tree outside of this little toilet window, and the nightingale was in a bush underneath. Okay, so they were talking to each other in a kind of antiphonal way. They were exchanging. Okay, so this is what is going to happen in that piece. Now, this is where your part starts. I would like to ask everybody to feel really comfortable with whether with a chair, lying on the floor, as you are, no matter. Just close your eyes. And listen to what I'm going to do. So I said he spent the night doing this, right? So that means that the birds were singing during the night, okay? So this is how he portrays the night. And as I play, I just want you to close your eyes. Do not look at me, forget that I exist. Just focus on these chords that will bring us to the night, okay? So now we're rejoining Fabrice's dark blues, okay? So just stay with me, close your eyes, and feel the night coming down on you. Okay, so this is the setting. If you were in a theater, you would have furniture, you would have a setting. This is the setting for our theater play tonight, okay? So now the exercise. I will play the piece from beginning to end, and I just want you to, just as I said, lie down, sit down, close your eyes, feel comfortable, and just put yourself in that place. Hear the night coming over you, and try to figure who is speaking, just as simple as that. And I'll give you some cues, okay? So someone is going to start, and I give you the cue, the woodlark will start, okay? And then there's going to be the nightingale, and then the lark will come back again, back and forth, and someone will end the dialogue, okay? So your exercise is really simple. You just need to focus on the music, sense who is speaking at each time, and then at the end, you just have to tell me who finished up the discourse. That's all I ask you, okay? So I hope you'll enjoy the experience. And don't look at me, I'm not important at all. Wait a second. Wait a second, please. Don't you just think you're going to leave with that. I asked you a question, I want an answer. I want an answer. So who finished the conversation? Which bird finished the conversation? Other opinions? The lark. Yeah, the lark. The lark won. Well, thank you so much. I see you didn't fall asleep, so that's good and that's bad. But anyway, thanks so much. This has been an incredible pleasure, Fabrice and Sonia, to be here and to share this moment with you. So thank you, everybody.